This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, the podcast where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. It's great to have you with me. I want to announce, big announcement, this is my 600th podcast. This is the 600th podcast of the Stephen Mansfield Podcast. And man, has it been a ride? Has it been fun? This is not the podcast with the biggest listenership. It's not the best funded podcast. It's not the most famous podcast, but it is highly influential. It's doing exactly what I wanted it to do. The people who listen to it in the world are often decision makers and leaders and people who are shaping events, and I am grateful. There are also a lot of us who are just listening to it because we want to learn and grow, who are leaders of the future, and that makes me happy. I love hearing from college students, just like I love hearing from senators and members of Congress and prime ministers from overseas and ministers of various nations. I got to tell you, it's been a real privilege. So this is a big moment, and in order to do something different on the 600th podcast, I'm going to answer some questions that many of you have written in about. A lot of you asked the same kinds of questions, so we kind of combined them. But I'm grateful that you are intellectually interested, that you are concerned, that you care about your world, that you care about the United States, of course, which is where I'm sitting. And I'm just grateful for you. So let's dive in and let me answer some of these questions that are pressing on some of your minds. I'm only going to use first names. Rebecca says, is the growing number of Muslims in America a net positive or net negative for our constitutional republic, and why? It's a great question. And I want to say that the issue here is that not all Muslims are the same. And the issue shouldn't so much be the religion of Islam, but the orientation, the way that certain people we let into the country orient to Islam. Let me give you an example. If we had a large number of Kurds, and we do, but it's not gigantic in America. The biggest, of course, is right here where I'm sitting in Nashville, Tennessee, about 25,000. If we had more Kurds who are religiously moderate for the most part, who have been mistreated by their Islamic brothers in the Middle East, and therefore are very open and very cautious and very Christian friendly, and of course many Kurds have been Jews throughout history, so they're less stridently anti-Semitic, etc., etc. America would only benefit by having more Kurds in America. So there are certain regions, certain types of people, certain tribes, certain orientations to Islam that would be welcome and would be good for our country. However, we've just seen in the last couple of years that some of the people we're letting into the country under student visas are actually radicals who I think have been sent to this country to radicalize the campus. Therefore, we saw a lot of the strident anti-Semitism on campus. For the most part, this didn't originate with suburbanites, white kids from suburbia, for example. No. This was white kids from suburbia being radicalized by their Middle Eastern student visa friends. Now, it's going to sound like I'm radical and angry and want to ban all student visas. No, of course not. But we've got to be wise to the fact that most of these student protests, that most of the anti-Semitism, that most of the chanting or the instigation for the chanting of Hamas, we love your missiles, which is just an evil thing to chant, and most of the stupidity, queers for Palestine, oh, come on. Most of this was led and instigated by radicals entering our country on student visas. So it sounds like I'm saying two things at once, and I am. It is not an issue of keep Muslims out of America. Muslims have fought our wars. They serve in our government. They are great business people. You can't speak with a broad brush. You can't broad brush Muslims in general. But we do need to be careful because there's no question there's a radical edge of Islam, and we don't want that in the country. We should be deporting radical clerics. We should be very carefully scrutinizing who we let in on student visas because our campuses are powder kegs right now, and we do not need strident, militaristic, violent, anti-Semitic, anti-America people in here, whom I believe are sent by foreign governments, sent into this country on student visas. So my answer to you, Rebecca, is yes and no. It's not because I can't make a decision. It's because the answer's split. Good Muslims, can I call them that? Would that be insulting? Good Muslims would be of benefit. Radicals of the kind I've just described on the university campuses, etc., absolutely not. Anti-America, anti-Jewish, anti-Christian, anti-democracy, hateful of women when they really get down to it. I could go on and on and on. So it's a split answer, but it's an answer that we need to pay attention to. And I think there's wisdom in what I'm saying, not just because I'm saying it, but because we're learning by experience that we can let good Muslims in and America benefits. We let the radicals in, there's bloodshed, there's violence, there's hatred, domination of women. Let me just say very quickly on a footnote, and I've got to keep my answer short, that I have helped extricate women from situations where they met the good-looking guy from a Middle Eastern nation on the campus. He was an advocate for his country. He dated the girl. He married the girl. It went back to his country. The woman, the American girl, finds out that she's one of many wives, is now in a country where she's completely dominated by Islam. Before long, she's finding herself being beaten. She's finding herself being dominated by her first wife, et cetera, et cetera. All of this on the radical edge of Islam. And I've been involved in helping to extricate women like that from their bondage, and there are movies about that, et cetera. One of the famous ones with Sally Field called Not Without My Daughter. So all of that to say, we want to be careful. We want to be wise. And again, it comes down to an immigration policy that isn't as stupid as the American immigration policy has been on almost every front in the last decades. All right, number 2, Eileen asked this question: do you see proof of this next generation being prepared to lead in the future, which may include really hard situations plus persecution of Christians in America? Let me tell you something. No young generation is ever ready to lead before they're called to lead. I've always enjoyed reading about the World War I generation just before we went to America engaged in World War I, the World War II generation just before we engaged in World War II. People, older generations were laughing at them, their clothes, their hair, their dances, their music, how weak they were, what pansies they were, how unprepared they were, how they hadn't worked on the farms like their grandparents, how they were urbanites, how they were stupid and uneducated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the crisis came, and they mounted up. The people we call the greatest generation right now, people in 1939, 1940, we're calling them idiots. We're saying that America was coming to an end because of these people. But they manned up, not putting down the women at all. They geared up, they loaded up, they armed up, they served up, they industried up, and they became the greatest generation. So I have my concerns about the young. I spent a lot of time on college campus. I spent a lot of time, eating pizza with kids late at night and talking to them. And I'm concerned about some of what they believe and some of what they've been convinced of. And I'll come back to it in a minute. But the neo-Marxism that's on the campuses and encouraged by leftist professors. However, I will tell you that I have great confidence in this young generation. And by the way, there's a spiritual renewal happening among that young generation. And I think they're going to be some of the most heroic, strident generations in Christian history. I think you're going to see that. And let me just give you some encouragement. Hardly any generation is ready for what befalls them. Hardly any generation is ready for the rise they're going to have to engage in order to meet the challenges of their time. Nor is any leader. All right, I can go back and give you the biographies of leaders. Very few of them were ready. They normally were idiots before they actually had power thrust upon them. So pray for them, love them, coach them where you can, but relax. The times, God, their own innate gifts will make them equal to the task. Frank asks, when will we prosecute corrupt politicians? I don't know when, Frank, but we dang sure should. I'm going to do another podcast. Maybe you've already heard me say this time and again, but I'm going to talk more about this. But we are in a crisis of corrupt politicians. We absolutely should be prosecuting. It doesn't help that Donald Trump is pardoning some people he shouldn't have pardoned. We've had people run for office on clear lies, get into office, be removed from office, and then Donald Trump pardoned them. So I'm not blaming all of this on him, but I'm mixed on Donald Trump, as I think any sane person should be, but that's my view. And so I think we've got to be careful. But yes, corrupt politicians making money on their position, politicians taking bribes, politicians part of who are actual traitors in our society, no question. These people should be prosecuted, and we will be talking about more about that as we go forward. Do I ever see a third party making it? No. I do not see in my lifetime, and I'm expecting to have another 30 years on the air, so that'll give you a sense of how long I think that's going to be. I do not see in my lifetime a third party making it. Now, of course, history can always surprise you. What I do think will work are reform movements within the parties. What we need right now are some reform movements within the Republican Party. We need some reform movements within the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is being kidnapped by its left edge. You need some sane reform movements within the Democratic Party. You need some sane reform movements that are not just extreme MAGA, not extreme anything, but sane, governing, wise, patriotic. I would even use the word godly, moral, rooted, based, whatever terms you want to use. So do I think we're going to have another party emerge of any strength? Well, we can always have Perot movements, but they just simply, they tend to queer the deal for more mainline politicians from one of the two parties, as we saw with Perot, where he, no question, cost George H.W. Bush the presidency in a second term. So you can have movements like that, but all they do is damage the competition between the two parties and people who can actually win. I didn't mind Perot's message. I thought he was good and wise and smart and saying things that needed to be said. But because he didn't drop out of the race early enough, he just queered the deal for George H.W. Bush. So I believe that we will not see third parties in our time, at least my time. I'm older than maybe a lot of people listening to this podcast. But we will see, and we should see, and we should encourage reform movements. A good example of this, by the way, and I'm not saying I'm in any way endorsing them, but a good example just sort of sociologically and politically is the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement, you may hate it, you may love it, but the important thing is the Tea Party movement was a reform movement within the Republican Party, within the conservative movement. Had a lot of influence, changed the dialogue, changed the discussion, changed who got nominated, who ran for office, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it was not an attempt to be a complete third political party. That would not have worked, but it was a reform movement, and it's a model we ought to be paying attention to. All right. That was a question, by the way, from Marshall, if I didn't say his name. Thank you, Marshall. Gary says, in regard to your episode on immigration policy, what about those who are here currently? And then somebody else chimes in, Stephanie chimes in and says, I was thinking the same thing, Stephen. Can you do a podcast on it? Because living in Chicago is very interesting right now. The narratives from church leaders are concerning, and of course, the media doesn't help matters. Listen, we are in a crisis of population in America. Our birth rate does not keep up with replacement. We are not replacing our population, and that's even with Hispanic birth rates. I used to joke all the time and say, hug a Hispanic, because the Hispanic birth rate is 5 times that of the white. If we didn't have the Hispanic birth rate, we'd be sinking. Well, now even Hispanics are producing fewer babies. Blacks used to produce twice that of whites. That's not happening as much. Whites are decreasing. Birth control, abortion, small family values, all of that is causing us trouble. And so we are not even replacing our population. So we're going to need a smart immigration policy. This is one of the great crises of our time, and I have said that time and time and time again, that we need a smart immigration policy. So as for those who are already in the country, we need a wise path to citizenship, and I believe this ought to include mastering English. It ought to include knowing American values. It ought to include understanding the market economy. It ought to include the things that we've been talking about. In other words, it ought to make them Americans. We need to make them Americans, but we need a path to citizenship that makes sense. So the immigration policies of recent generations, certainly during the Biden administration, which was, I believe, an absolute betrayal of our country. And Donald Trump has shut it down, but we can't afford to completely shut down immigration. We need to devise a wise path. And Donald Trump getting up in the morning and suddenly hating on Somalis or hating on people from certain countries in the Middle East. You want these people. We want the influx of intelligence. We want other people's brain drains. In other words, we want smart people from Lebanon coming here and starting businesses and making babies and et cetera, et cetera. But we want them to be Americans. So I know this is where I always land, and sometimes you guys write me and say, look, I love what you say, but dang, you always seem to be taking a middle road. Well, it's not that I just choose that because I can't decide. It's because, look, I'm saying what I'm saying right now. Look at this example. How do we say, let's not have anybody coming into this country? Well, we'll die as a society. We will absolutely die. It's almost as stupid as China's one-child policy. So all that to say, we are not replacing our population. We're going to need immigration to be vital as a country. We want their gifts. We want their intelligence. We want their unique contributions to our society, but we want them to be American. We don't want to have great mass bodies of foreigners who can't speak our language, who don't understand our values, who don't get integrated into American values and culture. I don't mean the negative side of it, the positive side of it. We're going to have to do a better job. And by the way, the clock is ticking. Hear me, those of you who are in government, those of you who are in a position to influence this. The clock is ticking. We don't have a lot of time. You can't reverse demographic trends quickly, and we all know that. All right. Thank you, Gary, for that one. Anthony says, which current world leader is positioned to have the most profound and enduring historical impact for generations to come? And what is the central reason? Have you met them? And is there not a widely known personal fact that you can tell us about them? Yeah, I thought about this question, Anthony. Thank you very much. The leader that I think has the potential to most change our current world society is probably going to shock you, but it is Mohammed bin Salman, who is the heir apparent in Saudi Arabia. I have met him. I have spent time with the Saudi royal family. Really enjoyed that. I was at KAUST, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology there, and I met a bunch of the royal family and spent time with some of them. And so all of that to say that the reason I think he is going to perhaps have massive influence on world affairs is that he is going to be the king, the ruler of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia could help restructure the Middle East. Already we've seen Mohammed bin Salman, his father's much older, and so he technically functionally is the ruler of Saudi Arabia now. He's restructuring Saudi Arabia. He's not an extremist. He's not a Wahhabist. That's the main religion, the version of Islam that dominates Saudi Arabia. He's not a Wahhabist. He has, consumed tequila with The Rock, the American actor The Rock. He's very Western friendly. He's very Donald Trump friendly. And he could help restructure the nature of Islam and the economic and political orientation of the Middle East. When you think about that, you're talking about 1.5 million Muslims in the world, give or take. And Saudi Arabia is the nation that is the treasure chest of Allah, they used to call it, meaning that it's a very wealthy country, and it has huge influence. And recently they've entered into deals with Israel, and they've allowed the Trump family and the Trump administration to engineer the Abraham Accords, which is still having huge impact in the Middle East, and the Saudis were part of it. So Mohammed bin Salman's light Islam, Western-friendly orientation, even his non-Islamic values, consuming alcohol, his high-tech Western orientation, innovative orientation, and his desire to restructure Islam and restructure the Middle East in a more globally friendly, less radical, American-friendly way, I think could have massive impact. And when I look at the world scene right now, I don't see anybody who has as much potential. I like him personally. I do know that he has tyrannical tendencies. Yes, I know he probably engineered the death of Khashoggi, and I'm, of course, not blind to that. But when we work with world leaders, we don't get to design them from the womb. So if you're asking me who is the one I think on the world scene today who has the most potential to restructure world history, it's going to be, I think, Mohammed bin Salman. Others could arise, but that's where we are right now. Thank you for that, Anthony. Really appreciate that. And then finally, my final question is from Jonas. He says, living in a culture that's oversaturated with intense and often horrific news, how do we avoid apathy and maintain sanity while staying informed enough to engage with the world around us? I appreciate the question, Jonas, very much. Yes, it's very easy to feel just overwhelmed with the negative. It's very easy to have the horrific news, as Jonas styles it, just taint your soul. How do we avoid apathy and maintain sanity? Well, two or three things. First of all, I believe, of course, everybody listening to this podcast knows that I'm a radical Christian, not radical, but devoted Christian, strong Christian, giving Christian, completely committed. And I think you have to have a connection to God. I don't think human beings were designed to live only in terms of their culture and their society on earth. I think the scriptures that I read talk about the world. And by the way, the word there in Greek is cosmos. It means the order or the system of men on the earth. It doesn't mean the planet. Is always going to be disturbing. It's always going to have corruption. It's always going to have sin. It's always going to have darkness. And we have all of that amplified into our lives more now through media. So I think you have to have a connection to God. You have to, in a sense, rise above the cultures. You have the God perspective, have the 30, 40,000 foot view, have a faith that has you stepping apart from the world. As one of the great writers once said, we have the world too much with us. And that is exactly the situation for us in our current society. I've often told you about the Saturday afternoon I was taking a nap and my phone rang, my phone buzzed with a message that somebody had fallen off a bridge in Australia. And I said, well, that's too bad. Lord, help them. You give their family grace. I went back to sleep. I was awakened again in 30 minutes. No, they actually didn't fall off the bridge. It was a bad report. And I just thought to myself, it's the first time in human history that this would have even entered something like this in Australia, would have even hit the news, even in their town, much less globally. And I just thought that to me is a marked statement of how every negative thing in our society is broadcast at full volume into our souls. The second thing, though, is we got to know a little history. We are not living in the worst of all times. We are not living in a time of pure horror. We are living in a time of great possibilities. And by knowing history, by reading history, by understanding the times that have come before us, we realize our times are difficult and challenging, but people have certainly lived through worse, and we will get through this. And then, of course, that what I talk about all the time is you have to create rituals and sanctuary and habits and moments in your life that are sane. Turn the dang phone off. Do whatever you do on your back porch. Pour the bourbon or light up the stogie or light a fire and throw a bunch of pinyon pine wood on there so it smells great. And have your wife sitting there or your buddies and talk. And don't talk about Trump and don't talk about, whatever negative thing has happened in the news, but talk about bigger, more interesting things and think and laugh and joke and read literature to each other. And one of the things I've loved doing is reading how people got through the Great Depression in America. And they renewed their abilities on guitar, and they had family sing-alongs, and they listened to radio programs that were, just great fantasies and space travel and Sherlock Holmes and whatever. And they had family poetry contests, and they had their neighbors in, and they read literature to each other, and they cooked what little food they had and tried to get creative to see how they could spice it and make it amazing. And they got simple. They got simple, they got creative, they got loving, they got artistic. And as I've said many times on this podcast, one of the things that fascinates me is that when you interview those people who survived the Great Depression decades later, many of them said, even though they'd had happy, prosperous lives and kids and grandkids, and many of them, certainly had enough money to live, if not a lot of money. And they said, really, the Great Depression was the greatest time of my life. We were close, we loved each other, we lived simply, we were creative. There was literature, there was poetry, there was music, there was hugging, there was story. There was Dad smoking his pipe and reading to us from the Bible or Sherlock Holmes or whatever literature, Dickens or whatever. And I believe strongly that's what you've got to do. So connect to God, build rituals, and know some history. Hey, thank you for being with me on this 600 podcast journey. We're going to keep on impacting lives. We're going to keep on informing leaders. We're going to keep on talking more about trends and the things that really shape history, not so much the headlines. But it's been a great ride with you. Thank you.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.